South American country. It's a small country of 18 million people, 4.3 million students. I would like to share one experience that we recently launched. Pretty much what we heard before in the last speaker's intervention about engaging youth in conversation of what they want for education, what they need for education, and what we can do as leaders in order to engage in education, also youth. I was young very recently. I try to think I'm still young. So I think it helps having a young minister, right? I'm 39. I turned 39 recently. I've been minister for a little bit more than a year. I'm not qualified as youth, but I was there just a few years ago. So I think I can still get, you know, what youth wants. And we've also achieved, so giving youth the opportunity, or young people the opportunity to be in policy-making positions is important. Youth can be in these positions and make good decisions. Sometimes people think that you need a lot of experience to be able to be seated at the table and making a contribution in policy making, and this is not true. You can be a policymaker as well as youth. Not only intervene or talk with policymakers, but become policymakers. So that I'll say it's one good lesson and good practice that we've implemented. Another one is that recently we launched a survey around the futures of education process that UNESCO launched globally. And in Ecuador, we had 2 surveys answered by more, the first one by more than 4,000 people, and the second one more than that, a little bit more than that. In total, 731,000 people answered. And we had 2 parallel surveys for adults and for youth and children. So it's pretty much a big conversation on education that happened in Ecuador. The first one was just at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, and the second one was in 2022. And what people answered to the survey has informed us to make the transformation of curriculum, and we're doing also as well an integral transformation of the education system, in which we've favored in the curriculum what youth wants education to be for them. So what they want, the main answers, when we ask them what's the main challenge that you think the planet is facing and that education should see, the first most common answer was the environment. So we all agree that education for sustainable development should be paramount in the education system, and this is common to many countries in the world, and in both surveys the main answer was the same. The second one was poverty. Even though we were in the pandemic, only the third one was strange or odd illnesses or a pandemic. So people understood that the environment and the coexistence with the environment is the most important thing that education should address at this point in humanity's existence. The second one is, we asked them, how would you like your educational institution to be, your school to be? And they answered, a place where everyone is respected. Everyone is respected. So the second thing that we have to prioritize in our curriculum is global citizenship, and also coexistence and peaceful ways of coexistence, and trying to reach agreements within the school systems as well. And what's the main, we asked, what's the main function of the educational institution? And the main answer was providing opportunities for people to become better, responsible citizens. And the second one, develop creativity and prepare us to discover things. So I wanted to share these results. And also regionally, in Ecuador, we right now are part of the steering committee, the regional steering committee for SDG 4. Together with Chile, we are the 2 countries for South America. And the decision that the Latin American and the Caribbean countries made recently in our last ministerial meeting, some of my colleagues are here, hello ministers, was that we included in the steering committee a youth organization. Because we believe also, not only nationally, we should include youth in decision making, but also regionally, we should include youth in decision making, and globally. So these are the three that I wanted to initially share. Thank you.
Thank you very much, His Excellency. Thank you very much, His Excellency, for those words and for sharing those good practices that you are doing in Ecuador, for showing that intergenerational solidarity work is feasible and young people have their seat in the decision-making table. And also for showing that transforming education, we also need to transform our curriculum and align it with the world we are living in today. Thank you very much for those good practices. Now I will hand the floor to His Excellency, Minister of Education of Portugal.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm a bit older, so yesterday I was not a young person, but I still remember, and for that reason, it's very easy to engage young people in the process of curriculum reform that we've been designing in Portugal. Let me start with the first concern we had. When we meet and talk about education, when we write pieces of legislation about education, there's lots of rhetorics. There's lots of beautiful words about students at the center. This is all about the youth. This is all about the students. But then there's the practice. It's all about the student, but we don't listen to the student. And this is a very clear contradiction in what we've been doing for decades, or for centuries maybe, in education. We want it to be about the students, but then you say you are a good student if you are very quiet and if you're very silent in class. This cannot be the truth. This cannot be the way to go. So with this in mind, we in Portugal, before I go to the how, let me go to the why. Why did we want to engage the students in the process of writing the legislation, the curriculum reform? We had three major goals in this curriculum reform: to promote better learning, to promote inclusion and equity, to promote citizenship. These are the three pillars of our policy, educational policy in Portugal right now. And you cannot define what good learning is about without asking the students, how do you learn? And this was the first question we asked. How do you learn? What makes you learn? What makes you want to learn? And the responses we got were amazing. The students told the whole country, we need more project-based learning. We need more motivation to be in school. We need to see the relevance of the theory we learn in relation with the problems that we are experiencing, like the ones that Maria mentioned. Then the second point, we are concerned about equity. Equity is about the curriculum. Equity is about access to the curriculum. It's not about having some separate classes or separate spaces. It's about access to the curriculum. So we need to talk to the students, not only to the privileged ones, but we need especially to talk to those students who are not able to learn, who are at risk of dropping out of school, and ask them, why are you not learning? Why don't you feel good in school? And the questions we got, the answers we got were extraordinary. In the first assembly of students that we made, after hearing students all over the country, they told us what we need for better learning is people smiling at us when we enter the classroom and we enter the school. And this is very cheap. For a government, this is good. And then about citizenship. Like in Ecuador, our students told us, and we were very committed already with having the whole body of the SDGs in our curriculum. We cannot say that we are worried about climate changes and not addressing it in school, or taking it as a bunch of opinions and not as a bunch of evidence that we are experiencing right now. But citizenship, and this is at the core of our curriculum, is also about human rights. And human rights is about empathy. It's about listening to the other. It's about interculturality. And this cannot be done if you are sentenced to silence in school. So what we did and what we've been doing, we had some old experiences with already 25 years, like the youth parliament. Students from all the country go to the parliament, do assemblies in the schools, and they have a national event a week in the parliament discussing proposals that they present to the MPs and that they are discussed also with the government. But we wanted to go beyond just events, and we wanted to actually change the practices in schools. So with their input, we added in the law on curriculum that schools have to create regular instances to hear the students about the curricular options. And this is happening. There's lots of student voice initiatives in the schools. We have a participatory budget in the schools that is a part of the budget for schools is decided by the students alone, only based on their proposals. And we even have some schools in which there is a deputy principal who is a student, elected by the others. So they sit at the table of the decisions at the local level and also at the national level, because we created also in my cabinet these regular instances for listening to the students. Two final messages. One concern we still have is that student voice cannot be an event, cannot be a summit in New York in 2 days in which we all say beautiful words about student voice. It has to be a daily practice, a daily routine, something that is fully embodied in the practices in classes and in schools and in our lives as legislators. And the other and the final message is that when we listen to students, we are humanizing school. Schools are, and education is about humanizing individuals, turning persons into individuals. And otherwise, what we are going to keep doing is to engage in this blunt speech of meritocracy, and we are only looking at the privileged ones, repeating privilege, and not giving the voice and listening to the voice of those that should be at the core of our attention, those who depend only on education systems in order to aim for a better life. So listening to their voices is listening to humanity and humanizing education. Thank you.
Thank you very much, His Excellency João da Costa, for showing those inclusive youth engagement, for not only having young people in the room, but also giving them the power to lead and engage. And also for walking the talk, because it's not about us coming here and give an example, but we have also to leave this room and walk the talk. So thank you very much for those good practices. Now over to you, His Excellency, Ms. Mariatu Kone.
Merci.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm Mariatu Kone, Minister of National Education of Cote d'Ivoire, and I'm a member of the steering committee, the SDG4 for Francophone Africa. I would like to say that in Cote d'Ivoire, with COVID, all of the problems that resulted from that, Cote d'Ivoire decided to rethink its education, beginning a national consultation that we called the National Conference on National Education and Literacy. So these were very inclusive consultations and especially participatory conversations, because we didn't want to leave anybody behind, especially young people from the future generations, the adults of tomorrow. In Cote d'Ivoire, more than 70% of the population is under the age of 35. And so that's a very crucial question for us. And we understood that we had to transform our education, create hope, and we understood that we had to take into account the aspirations and the needs of young people. And so they were involved. They were involved in the National Conference on National Education that lasted about 10 months. They were involved at every stage. They were involved in every region of the country. We from the bottom to the top. They were involved as well via a platform, a digital platform, in case some people would not have the time to get involved in the regions. And so you understand that for us, this national conference on education was designed by and for young people. We listened to them in order to be able to act better as decision makers. We, through that national conference, there were really great moments. There were moments of intergenerational dialogue, because sometimes we had the impression that the young people and elderly people had different positions, but we listened to them in order to be able to better act coming out of the national conference on national education. We understood that it was important. It was important to reform education, taking into account certain aspirations and needs of the young people that came out in the consultations, and especially the speed of technological change, because we saw that young people today in Cote d'Ivoire, they have a multitude of ways of learning, but their contribution is not really valued. And so we understood as well that we had to reform education and teaching by taking into account the promotion of science and technology and innovation, but also transform, bearing in mind the most appropriate measures in order to solve the problems that emerge at the level of the climate, the school environment, citizenship. We talk about the new Ivorian. What do the young people think we should do to have a new Cote d'Ivoire? With respect to our experience, well, with the implication, with the involvement of young people, we have a survey underway with young people to assess their level of satisfaction, with a view to adjusting or readjusting the measures that have been defined that came out of the recommendations of this national consultation. And we also set up a system where one of the moderators is here. It was she represents the point of view of youth and the work that we're doing. And with youth, we chose to co-build a social pact around Ivorian education to improve our system. I'm going to stop there, and I'm ready to ask questions if there are any after. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Minister, for sharing those good practices in Cote d'Ivoire, specifically on transforming curricula and including young people on the process. This is really shown that young people are heard and are also considered. Thank you very much, Ministers. It was good to hear from you all. Now I'm going to pass the floor to our amazing youth leaders. You have all heard what our ministers are doing. So now I wanted to hear from you as the young people, like in your experience, what are you doing in engaging your respective governments to influence education policies in your countries? Over to you.
Bonjour à tous et à toutes.
Good morning, one and all. My name is Yasmine Siai, and I represent young people from Cote d'Ivoire today. Young people are involved in the decision-making process for the future of education in Cote d'Ivoire. In Cote d'Ivoire, we have school councils. School councils bring together all pupils from a particular school. And what they do, there is a chairperson who's also an elected pupil who bridges the gap between the students and the school leadership, the staff, so that the school and the administration communicate better. We also have a youth parliament in Cote d'Ivoire. The youth parliament in Cote d'Ivoire puts forward solutions to improve education in Cote d'Ivoire. We had a youth report. This is something that's been set up. And that is a place where young people can put questions and try and see what proposals there are to improve the situation And then the Ministry of Education looks at all these proposals. We also have the National Council of Young People of Cote d'Ivoire. There's an education committee within that. That's also headed up by young people. The Education Committee takes in consideration the proposals that are made by all youth organizations, and they are made available to young people, or rather to the Ministry of Education. In Cote d'Ivoire, young people are involved in the entire process. They have been since the summit was announced. A committee that is very inclusive was set up. It was set up to prepare for the summit. Young people were represented right from the start. Young people were involved in the pre-summit preparations. Young people in Cote d'Ivoire are really involved, and this shows how the Cote d'Ivoire authorities involve young people in education. Young people have shown that education is of interest to them, because what we say is everything that is done for us but without us is against us. So what is important is that our opinions are taken into consideration in order to improve education. What we want as young people is to be involved in follow-up to the decisions that are taken at this summit. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for showing all the way that you are doing in Cote d'Ivoire in engaging ministers and government to help young people, and specifically on using your voices on the different advisor group and committee that you are part of. Just quoted what you say, and which I really like, saying that what is done without us, it's really against us. And so if we really want to transform education, we should all call us and we come together and decide for what we want. Thank you. Now I'll give the floor to Maria.
Good morning. My name is Maria. I'm 15 years old and I'm a high schooler. So first of all, it is an honor to be here today along with my country's Minister of Education representing Portugal, of course. This is such a remarkable moment in my life that I would like to ask you if you wanted to take a selfie with me. Is that okay? Yes? Is that okay? Okay. I want big smiles, okay? Big smiles. Okay. Let's go. Woo! Nice, amazing. You're so beautiful, all of you. Okay, so, okay. Now, anyway, so the best ways for us Portuguese students to help the government change and transform education are, in fact, to be engaged with our own education and, as change makers, make our voices heard, which is exactly what happens in my school, where class and students' assemblies take place systematically for us to discuss all the things that have to do with our own learning path and how we want to learn, where we get to make our own decisions. So it is up to us to decide what projects we develop within the classroom in which climate change and sustainability are almost always the main focus. We're the ones who contact the enterprises and universities so they can validate our ideas scientifically. And we are also the ones who do the experiments, who do new experiments and create and produce and develop new products who can reduce pollution with the help of our partnerships, who can show us the results of our ideas before we get to present them at universities and contests. At my school, we can also be mentors. Voluntarily, we help other students sometimes a week for their grades improvements. So it obviously helps us, both the student and the mentor, not only in an academical way, but also on a personal level, since the concepts of empathy, cooperation, collaboration, and trust are essential here. Besides all of this, we care about the unfortunate. So we organize every year several charity and solidarity events in which are included food collection and donation, and theater plays and concerts to raise money. In fact, this year, recently actually, we produced a film in order to raise awareness about the need of peace. So basically, we believe that we are the future of education. We think that we can change the school. We can transform the school, the region, the community, the country, and even the world. We, at the end of the day, we all make part of the big solution to this huge problem in front of us. So that's why I think we are the future, because we believe and we work in co-agency with our teachers and our community and everything that surrounds us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria, even though I'm just jealous because don't ask a selfie with me. But anyway, thank you very much. It was good to hear those good practices that you are doing in your country in changing the norms and also in engaging your government. It was good to hear from you all, and we have all realized from the discussion that it was about transforming curricula and fully engaging young people. And we all know that the only equalizer is education. So we have to transform education. And for that to be possible, we have to engage young people. Thank you all, our discussion speaker, and please, you can regain your seat. Thank you.
You know, one of the things that I like about panels like this is that they enable us to reflect. So I want you to sit there and reflect. Don't just listen. Reflect and ask yourself what you'll take back to your home country. One of the greatest things I'm hearing is that we need to include young people and children, especially the most marginalized. Children stuck in the justice system, children in refugee camps. I have interacted with these children and young people back in my home in Kakuma. So I'd like to thank our panelists today. Please, please, please give them a warm round of applause. Wonderful, wonderful. And so I'm now pleased to welcome our next moderator, who is also a young person, energetic. His name is Ulysses Brengi. Ulysses, please come up. Ulysses is the SDG4 Youth Representative to the Transforming Education Summit, which is why we are here today, the Transforming Education Summit Advisory Committee. He will lead the discussion on improving youth participation in transforming education. Keep tweeting, #TransformingEducationSummit.
Hello, yeah. Hi everyone, good morning, buenos dias. I hope you're having a great time. So we're gonna start improving youth participation in transforming education. So I will welcome our esteemed panel of speakers. First of all, His Excellency Mr. Dominic Cardy, Minister of Education and Early Childhood Development in Canada. His Excellency Mr. Marco Antonio Avila, Minister of Education from Chile. And His Excellency Mr. David Monina Senge, Minister of Education from Sierra Leone. And now I would also love to introduce our young peers, and I would expect way bigger applauses for them. Mr. Niall Deng from Canada and Ms. Mamawa Jaya. Woo! So we're missing one young leader? Not again. Okay, great. Ready to go? Okay. So I would like to start first with the ministers. Based on your experiences, what else or what more needs to be done to ensure meaningful youth engagement in education policy?
Thanks very much. So I'm not going to make any claims about being young, but 30 years ago, I was head of a party youth wing. And one of the messages that I remember really stuck with me from that time is that there is always that tendency to say that when you are young, you should be involved in youth activities, only in education. So one of the main things I want to say is that do not be restricted, that the world's problems are your problems. I just came here from Ukraine, where 2,000 schools have been destroyed. Those problems are your problems. Speaking up for peace, for justice, for racial equality, for gender equality, for the liberation of sexual minorities, those are all of our problems, old, young, regardless of where we come from. So, in Canada, we have got 13 provinces and territories and 13 ministers of education, which might be a good idea or a bad idea, but that's what we have. So I'm here from the Council of Ministers of Education in Canada, and what I think we need to do when we're talking about involving young people in the processes of changing education, as everyone else has spoken here today, is to listen. Because the real honor is not to be in this room. The honor is to be in the working class communities in my province, to be in the favelas, to be in the barrios, to be in the places where people live. And if we forget that, then we are failing in our main responsibilities, which is to be the voices for citizens, and to be the voices of genuine democracy. And when it comes to concrete tools, in my province, a small province in the east coast of Canada, we have a bilingual education system, and I'll take this opportunity, you don't have to put your translators on, to congratulate the Fédération des Jeunes Acadiens de Nouveau-Brunswick, a federation of young Acadians who have spoken out and pushed for their voice to be heard. They didn't ask to come to the table, they didn't wait for us to pull out the chair, they pushed open the door and sat down and said, this is what we need. And we've listened, because we've introduced, instead of appointed bodies in our governance structures in our school system, they're going to be elected, and they're going to be elected by students, and they're going to be sitting at the table with ministers and helping us make decisions based on the voices and the needs of youth. That is, to me, real engagement, not talking about young people, but letting them choose their voice and making that voice heard.
In conclusion, in French, because my province is the only bilingual province in Canada, when it was the honor for me to be the acting president of the body for young people, we ensured that young people were involved in all decision making, because that is true democracy, because we can't have democracy without the voice of young people.
Thank you so much, Minister. I would love the thing of owning the problems that are out there in the world. We tend to point other ways to other places, but we have to start owning the problems that we see every single day in Ukraine, in Canada, in our own cities, in our own places. So, Marco Antonio, go ahead.
Muy bien, buenos.
Good morning, everyone. For me, it's a pleasure to greet you. I'm going to speak in my mother tongue, Spanish. And I bring to you the greetings of my government, where our president, our current president, most of the ministers until 10 years ago were student leaders in the university world. They fought in the streets for free education, quality education in our country. So it's a government which believes in the participation of young people and the action of young people. We are convinced in our government that the major responsibility that schools and educational centers have for the participation of young people is crucial. We have spoken a great deal about the need for young people to participate. However, our appeal was to the adults to generate the necessary authorities and to create transformation in a democratic way. Schools very often reflect a rather traditional state, and it was difficult for us who are teachers, difficult for us to move forward in those spaces for democracy and to exercise our civic rights. And that's why we are convinced that the schools have to be the ones that generate those democratic spaces for participation, for coexistence, for critical thought, for skills and that are appropriate for the 21st century. So strengthening this democracy requires a very clear definition of the decision makers, the ministers of education, of course, generating governance within the institutions. And in our case, we have a educational council where students, families, teachers have the possibility to take decisions when it comes to the horizon that an institution would have. But this is still a very precarious exercise with the today, the Advisory Council of the Ministry of Education that I lead is made up entirely of students. Before we had families as well, and now we're just having students on the council with the participation of parents as well. But for us, it's crucial for decision making. And secondly, what we've done is that the public education reform, which our country began 6 years ago and which we are going to strengthen and promote, there's also a body called the Local Council, where the families and the students can be involved in decision making when it comes to how schools go in their district and the educational projects that they get involved in. And lastly, we are promoting a law as well, a law that was somewhat overlooked, a law that creates a plan or the civic policy and human rights policy within schools where there is an obligation that the educational institution has a very definite space for participation. And we are sure that this participation of young people, especially thinking about strengthening social cohesion, democracy, this means that we have to be the adults have to be the ones that are leading the schools and educational projects. We have to generate the conditions for that participation to take place, to be compelling, and to be a true democratic exercise. Only in that way, given the fact that education is learned by participating, we're going to have adults who have to have clear convictions when it comes to protecting democracy. And of course, that would not mean falling into extremism, as we saw in many parts of the world. And that's a very unhealthy way of approaching democracy. We know that this democracy is fragile and we have to protect it. And to protect this democracy, we have to generate this participation today. I simply want to close by emphasizing the importance that in meetings such as this, we should be able to then transfer the exercise of educational policies in transforming the school curricula and above all in the change in the belief that certain teachers have. Sometimes we have been trained with a more traditional vision in a sort of very vertical logic, and so we have to change, all of us have to change our way of thinking so that we can make room for this participation that we all require. And this means as well that we have to rethink schools as a space for politicization, a space where you live democracy, where the problems of the population are the ones that allow us to learn. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sir, especially saying that schools are the place to discuss and protect democracy, and also the key role of elected students representatives in governance structures. I would like to pass the floor to Minister Senge. We would like to hear from you.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to congratulate all the young people who've been working really hard to put this amazing day together. Yeah, I think it's important that we know that this is the time when it's not just enough to talk and to make commitments, and that we must follow those promises and those conversations with detailed actions. When I was in Paris for the pre-summit, I promised that I'll bring young people, and today we have young students from all over Sierra Leone who are with us in the room here. when I was at COP as well, I promised that we should set up a youth advisory group. And with Plan International, who's here, we've been able to set up a youth advisory group that is embedded within the ministry, and we'll put it into law that young people must be giving advice on all policy matters that affect education in Sierra Leone. It is also important that young people are not just invited into the room. They're not just sitting, they're not just given space at the table. They must be given a decision-making vote. It is important that young people must be resourced. It is important that the barriers that limit their full participation must be removed. And when we allow them to be part of not just the problem identification, but the problem solution, that is when we can truly transform our countries. Now, my team does not always like when I am given the mic on these global stages because I challenge them. So I'm going to challenge my team in Sierra Leone again to do something that they don't know that I was going to tell them. There are 12,000 schools in Sierra Leone, and each one of those schools have what we call board of governors and school management committees. I'm going to challenge them and all of us that those decision-making teams in those schools must have young people, and we must put it into law. These decisions and commitments that we make at opportunities and in rooms like this are not just for show. And we as leaders must ensure that the commitments that we make here with the young people must be followed through, and that we don't just say, we're waiting for you, you're welcome to the room, but that when you come, your vote does matter. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's not only about our voice. Sometimes we're tired of just being heard. We just want to actually vote and be part, and we're afraid sometimes of challenges, but those challenges make better solutions, more innovative and creative ideas. So thank you so, so much. And now I will go with my young peers. From your perspective, what good practices in involving youth in your country context could be replicated?
Thank you so much. My name is Niall Deng. I grew up in a refugee camp in Kenya called Kakuma. I now live in Canada. And first, I would just like to mention that it was so hard for me to get here. My US visa was denied 2 times. All my colleagues in the Refugee Education Council were denied visas as well, so I'm the only one in the council. And as Minister Senga just said, I think there's so many barriers that limit young people from participating in conferences like this, and I think visa is one of them. So I really hope that moving forward, that is something we address. Thank you so much, and thank you so much, Mr. Senga, for those wonderful commitment. I think from my perspective, one thing that is very important is co-creation. I think there's so many different incredible ways young people are engaged in conversations and decision-making table, but I think these are only limited to committees and they're only limited to consultation. I think we need to move beyond those and actually see young people as partners, not just as beneficiaries. So we need to co-create solution with young people, not to design solution first and then we ask for young people views on those solutions. It should start from the very first time we sit down and imagine what is happening in the world and try to come up with a solution. So I think co-creation is a very important thing, and that is one thing that I believe will help us in being able to imagine education. The other one, which is also very important, is inclusion. And I think when we sit here today, I hope we really see that inclusion should not just mean allowing a very small fraction of marginalized youth to access education, but it should include, it should mean leaving no child behind. And as one of the youth, activists says this morning about the number of refugee children who are left behind in accessing educational opportunities today, I live in Kakuma refugee camp for 11 years where education is very limited. So I really hope, in transform education, inclusion should be a main theme, and that should include, including young people in all their diversities, refugees, indigenous, LGBTQI youth, migrant youth, young people in all their diversity. No one should be left behind. And when we talk about co-creation, something that is very important that we did with the Refugee Education Council is that we work closely with Canada, not just as refugees, but as partners. So every single year we come up with a work plan that guide the minister work with us. And also when we work on Canada Together for Learning Summit this year, the Youth Council came up with the Youth Manifesto, which bring together young people voices, not just who are in the council, but young people who are out of the council. So I think it's very important that when we have young people in these committees, we should not just limit their participation to the committee, opportunity, but we should give them an opportunity to go out and reach their peers so that they can bring together the voices of young people from everywhere. And then, I think the other one, which is also very important, is moving away from just giving young people hope. Minister Senga talked about, a commitment that we make, making sure that we realize this commitment. I think we have so many conversations about how we can find solution to problem in our world today. But as soon as we leave these spaces, we go back to business as usual. If we're really serious about transform education, I really hope that after this summit, we do not go back to business as usual. We walk the talk. That include making sure that commitment made here, are realized to the fullest. And I believe all young people here today will hold you accountable. Accountability is one thing that is very important. And in the Refugee Education Council Youth Manifesto, that is something we put at the front. We asked Canada that we want to make sure that commitment we made today at the Together for Learning Summit are implemented in all, to the fullest. And then, something which is also very important is that, young people participation in education should not just be limited to committees and youth council and consultation. I would like to urge all education ministers here today to have young people as part of their team. Please include young people as part of your team, not just as intern and youth council members, but as part of your team. Young people can be director of policy, they can be director of communication, they can be project managers, they can be, policy makers. So let's ensure that we have young people as part of your team, and also young people can be ministers too of education and lead the wheel in transform education. So I really hope those are things we'll put into consideration as we move forward in transform education. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And that being said, we will expect your emails from the minister's team to join your teams and to be part of actually making the change. So we'll be expecting that. And last but certainly not least, does your microphone work?
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Mr. Moderator. I am Mama Wajai, pupil of the Great Nyapui Senior Secondary School of Excellence, and also a member of the Youth Advisory Group and a representative from Sierra Leone. Before now, youths were being left out of decision making. They were prevented from taking active part and making decisions for their own futures. However, it is not enough to give young people the podium. Their suggestions must be truly and fully incorporated. For that, I say a very big thank you to our Honorable Minister, Dr. David Mwenina Senge, who committed to bring on board the Youth Advisory Group. The Youth Advisory Group is a body set for young people to come and give out their voices and meaningful decisions into the MBSSC that leads to national development. I want you all to give an applause to our Honorable Minister for that. And one of the things, based on my own perspective, that I want leaders from all over the countries to replicate is that you need to establish a youth advisory group in your various countries. Youth advisory group is a platform that I think youth bring in sustainable change, meaningful innovation, skills, and ideas. And for that, I think you should establish a youth advisory group in your different countries. Another thing here, I may like other countries to replicate, in which my own country, Sierra Leone, is being involved in, is that radical inclusion. There is a policy called radical inclusion, which involves children all over the country, Sierra Leone, despite their vulnerability, despite their location, whether rural or urban, despite their social and economical well-being, they must be included into equality and equitable education. They must have access to that. And that is one of the things that my minister sitting beside me here implemented, and is still in progress. And for that, I want all countries, all leaders, and the whole world to implement that policy called radical inclusion. For a country to be transformed, these are some of the steps that need to be considered. Another thing here is my country, Sierra Leone, is one of the countries that I'm so proud of. Even sitting here now, I'm proud of that country because the first man we call the president, which is His Excellency retired Brigadier Julius Maada Bio, engaged young people few weeks back, learners and young people, to know what are the challenges they go through, what are some lapses they go through in their communities and schools. And I think by doing that, our country is very, 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 very well developed. And I may like to tell you all, leaders from all over the world, to follow this path that my president of my country is doing. Learn to engage young people, learners, know the issues they are going through, know the challenges they are facing in their various communities and schools, so that you can have a solution in solving those problems. And another thing here also, I may want other country to replicate here is that youth policy. Youth policy is a policy that all youths, youth in so many countries that I know of, youths are being left behind. They don't take youth decisions into consideration. I want all countries all over the world. I am a youth, and on behalf of the Youth Advisory Group from Sierra Leone, I therefore plead with all leaders, all presidents, all ministers, and the whole world to please involve youth in meaningful decision making. Youth have brimming minds. Please, don't leave youth behind, because they bring meaningful decisions on the table. Not including youth in decision making in a nation is the biggest mistake a country should ever do. And I want to close this speech by please appealing to you all to give a very big applause to my tireless Minister of Basic and Senior Education, which is Dr. David Senga. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much for such strong and powerful words. And I would like to thank the rest of the panel as well for sharing your experiences, your knowledge, and what could be brought to other countries. So thank you so much. A big round of applause, please. And I would like to leave the stage. For the last part of the okay. Well, a miscommunication issue. For the last part of the session, we are doing a fireside chat with, I would like to ask to join the stage, Her Excellency Ms. Joka Brandt, Permanent Representative of the Netherlands to the United Nations in New York, and Ms. Manal Musan, a youth leader also from the Netherlands. Well, welcome. I would like to ask first to Ms. Joka. We know that Netherlands have been very active in engaging with the UNSG, our common agenda, and its follow-up. How have you been championing youth engagement in the Netherlands?
Well, thanks very much for that, and it's great to be here with all of you, and it's especially great to be here together with Manal for this fire chat today. Yes, we've been very much involved. And to have a concrete answer to your question, one is through our national intervention by consulting youth before we actually do our interventions. But secondly also, and I think it's important in the context of the UN, we were asked to lead the start of this process to come up with a declaration on future generations. And here we made a really strong commitment to involve youth and youth organizations right from the start. So basically in two ways, by organizing a virtual consultation where they could all speak, and secondly by also giving the opportunity to provide written input. And I think what we've heard here a lot is what resonated with me, that it's not about giving a podium. It's not just about listening, but it's also about the willingness to then act upon what you've heard and listen to. And there's a couple of things that stood out, were really excellent comments. One was that there was a lot of focus by young people on the importance of intergenerational solidarity. Second was to take a much more longer-term vision, so to also look at future trends and already increase your knowledge about what the impact of these trends is going to be on young people. And three is that the interests of older and younger generations do not always align, and that is sometimes uncomfortable and challenging. And what it means for me, and I think we've heard that here as well, is that we cannot go on with business as usual. I mean, it requires a real transformation, and we cannot have transformation without youth, and we cannot have transformation without transformed education. Because people always say is, what is really important is the planet we leave behind for our young people and for future generations, but I think we should also turn it around. It's also very important, the young people and the future generations, that we leave to take care of the planet. And so if we don't invest in people that are actually already leaders now, we can see that and empower them, then we will not get to that transformation. And the reason that Manal is also here, I think, is because she's very good in explaining transformative ideas. So Manal, please go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Ambassador. Well, as a youth representative, I first of all really feel the privilege that I'm able to be here and speak on behalf of the youth that I spoke to, but I felt a very clear message coming from the Dutch youth. We want policies to have a more long-term vision, and what we also would like is to have policies that have an equal impact on all generations. So what we did, we took matters in our own hands, as we young people do a lot. We decided to build upon the idea that the Dutch Ministry of Interior already had. In the Netherlands, we have the Dutch National Generational Test, and my colleagues and I built further upon that idea, because what we wanted, if we listen to the wish that young people have, is that we have a tool, an instrument that assesses policies before implementation, which means that you could actively watch out for having policies that treat different generations in an unequal manner. And what we also wanted is to have a tool or an instrument that focuses on current generations, but also on future generations. Because we believe that if we aim to focus on future generations, then we will automatically have policies that are future-proof. So we created the United Nations Generational Test, and it's a big initiative that we started. And it is the thing that we believe is a concrete example of how we want policies to be future-proof. So now that I'm here with you, I would like to ask you, Ms. Ambassador, what do you think of this initiative? What is your opinion?
Well, I really like it. I personally like these really concrete initiatives, and I think in itself it's already an example of how young people can improve on ideas, good ideas that governments may have, but that can always be further improved. And what I particularly like about this is that we're moving, because the idea was born because young people had found out that existing policies had a negative impact on young people, So what I really like about your edition is that we're moving from, basically repairing the damage to making sure the damage doesn't happen. Like prevention is always better than cure. And I think this is really important for young people. We're trying to do that now in the Netherlands as a kind of a pilot. So one area where I think it was piloted was with the education grant system. And obviously for all young people here in the room, you know how important that is. And we've heard that as well from others, how important it is, not just for young people, but for the whole of society to make sure that education is inclusive, accessible in an equitable way. So I think we can absolutely take this tool, this intergenerational tool, to the United Nations, and I think it's really good for young people to sort of push for that. Also, when we start talking about Summit of the Future and the Declaration for Future Generations, because I think it's just logical that also UN policies and programs do this intergenerational test again to make sure right from the start that A, the interests of young people are being taken into account, and B, that we know what the effects are going to be. So I'm all for it. So what are the next steps going to be?
Well, I think the next steps are partly in our hands, but also largely in the hands of you, because we believe that the UN and the UN bodies that are focused on education and focused on future-proofing policy should be the one to sit with us and think with us about how we could actively start implementing very concrete tools to actually achieve future-proof policies. So let this be an open invitation to all of you. And what we would really hope is that by the Summit of the Future in 2024, that we would have an active big youth campaign that is campaigning for the idea of the United Nations generational tests. And I'm definitely always here to inform all of you more about that. Thank you.
I would like to thank the two of you for sharing your experience coming from Netherlands, and everyone for this session. I hope you take notes of some of the ideas that all the panelists shared today. So thank you so, so much.
One of the most interesting things that has captivated me throughout this session is the emphasis on youth engagement through policy. Minister Senge, I'd just like to tell you that in Kenya, we have already done that. The New Children's Act in Kenya actually emphasizes that children should be included in all dialogues. So please, 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 come and take a benchmark in my hometown in Kenya. So now, I have the pleasure to introduce our next segment. Having heard from the previous speakers, thank you so much, Uli, for that team. The next section will be on intersectional areas for transforming education. And this segment will be held in the breakout rooms, which I will announce shortly, and you can choose which ones you want to go to. We want to invite everyone to join one of the sessions on the screen. But before I do that, I'd just like to challenge the young people here. There's a very famous quote that we keep saying back home in Nairobi. If they don't give us a seat at the table, we're going to bring our own folding chairs. Is that right? Will we? Will we do that? Okay. And if we don't have our own folding chairs, and there's no seat at the table, we're going to make one for ourselves. All right, so the parallel thematic sessions in the breakout rooms will be held as follows. The first breakout session will be on climate action for inclusive education. That's room CR12. The second one will be the breakout session 2, gender transformative education, room CR6. The breakout session 3 will be fostering student leadership through transformational teaching, room CR7. breakout session 4, Youth and Education Advocacy, room CR5. And lastly, breakout session 5, Educate Yourself About Refugee Youth, room CRA. Thank you so much for your active participation this morning, and we will see you later.
taking $13,000 from her trapped savings. She told local TV that she needed the money to fund her sister's cancer treatment.
I'll do it.
Will we chair?
very good morning, and I'm terribly sorry, but the world is in trouble, and so sometimes I get myself into trouble too.
All right, good afternoon. We'll start off with some opening remarks from the Secretary General, and then I think we'll take a question or two. Well, the Secretary General will take a question or two. Yeah.
Well, ladies and gentlemen of the media, thank you very much for your presence and welcome. I have just returned from Pakistan, where I looked through a window into the future. A future of permanent and ubiquitous climate chaos on an unimaginable scale. Devastating loss of life, enormous human suffering, and massive damage to infrastructure and livelihoods. It is simply heartbreaking. No picture can convey the scope of this catastrophe. The flooded area is 3 times the size of my entire country, Portugal. And what is happening in Pakistan demonstrates the sheer inadequacy of the global response to the climate crisis and the betrayal and injustice at the heart of it. Whether it is Pakistan, the Horn of Africa, the Sahel, small islands, or least developed countries, the world's most vulnerable, who did nothing to cause this crisis, are paying a horrific price for decades of intransigence by big emitters. G20 countries are responsible for 80% of emissions. And they are also suffering the impact of record droughts, fires, and floods, but climate action seems to be flatlining. If 1/3 of G20 countries was underwater today, as it could be tomorrow, perhaps they would find it easier to agree on drastic cuts to emissions. All countries, with the G20 leading the way, must boost their national emissions, must reduce their targets, must boost their national emissions reduction, and must limit the world's temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. Pakistan and other climate hotspots need flood-resilient infrastructure now. And those most responsible for emissions must step up with the funds for adaptation. At least half of all climate finance and climate resilience should go to adaptation to protect people and economies. Unless action is taken now, unless funds are disbursed now, these tragedies will simply multiply with devastating consequences for years to come, including instability and mass migration around the world. So my message to world leaders gathering here is clear. Lower the temperature now. Don't flood the world today. Don't drown it tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, the General Assembly is meeting at a time of great peril. Geostrategic divides are the widest they have been since at least the Cold War. And they are paralyzing the global response to the dramatic challenges we face. Our world is blighted by war, battered by climate chaos, scared by hate, and shamed by poverty, hunger, and inequality. Conflicts and unrest continue to rage. The war in Ukraine is devastating a country and dragging down the global economy. And despite the Black Sea Grain Initiative and the agreement that we are doing everything to make it happen in reality, to get Russian food and fertilizers to global markets, there is a real risk of multiple famines this year. Global hunger began to rise before the pandemic and has never recovered. And the cost of living crisis is hitting the poorest people and communities hardest, with dramatic effects. And the rights of women and girls are going into reverse, and most developing countries have no fiscal space and no access to the financial resources needed to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic and protecting their people from the devastating impact of climate change. the solidarity envisioned in the United Nations Charter is being devoured by the acids of nationalism and self-interest, by a shocking disregard for the poorest and most vulnerable in our world, by politicians who play to people's worst instincts for partisan gain, by prejudice, discrimination, misinformation, and hate speech that pit people against one another, and by a global financial system that penalizes those with the least, by fossil fuel corporations killing the planet to rake in the most. My speech to the General Assembly will address these issues with concrete recommendations and a call to action. As fractures deepen and trust evaporates, we need to come together around solutions. Solutions like those that will be showcased at the Transforming Education Summit. People need to see results in their everyday lives, or they will lose faith in their governments and institutions, and they will lose hope in the future. And so this year's general debate must be about providing hope and overcoming the divisions that are dramatically impacting in the world. That hope can indeed only come through the dialogue and the debate that are the beating heart of the United Nations, and that must prevail next week against all divisions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we get to our questions, just, you know, we have our very helpful interpreters, Spanish and French, in case the Secretary General answers in Spanish or English. I would ask you please to... Spanish or French? Spanish or French. Yes, sometimes you do answer in English. Sorry, sir. Maybe I need the interpreter. If I could also ask you, yes, take off your mask when you ask the question, and please limit yourself to one question so we can get... Sorry? You could try in Portuguese as well. Go ahead, Valeria, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Secretary General, for this press conference. It's always great to see you here. So my question is on Ukraine. In light of the inspection of the IAEA and the state of the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, can it guarantee the supply of energy and, most of all, the heating to the region for which it must guarantee it? And are you aware of the possibility of maintaining heating and all other utilities for the Ukraine people need, from Zaporizhia to Donbas to Kharkiv, since the winter is almost approaching? Thank you.
According to the information I have, electricity is being provided to the reactors for guaranteeing the cooling of those reactors. And other areas that also need the electricity supply are having it. And we hope that it will be able to maintain it, both with generators and through the grid. The IAEA remains on the site, and the information we have are also that until now there was no radiation measured that is worrying. I believe that we have been now 3 days without bombing. I hope that this kind of attacks will cease, and I hope that the security of the nuclear power plant will be maintained entirely at all costs and fully respected by the parties.
Thank you. Edie Lederer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General. A quick follow-up on what you just said about Zaporizhia. We heard that there are some talks going on between the IAEA chief, Mr. Grossi, and the Ukrainians and the Russians. Is that what you believe has led to the end of shelling for the past 3 days, or are these talks something the UN is encouraging, involved in other ways?
Those talks are taking place, and I hope they will contribute to quiet things down. I cannot establish a cause and effect, but I believe that the IEA presence is a very important deterrent, and that their contacts are a very important deterrent in relation to any kind of attack against the power plant.
What I was going to ask you about was Ukraine also, whether the offensive by the counteroffensive by the Ukrainian government, which has led to the recapture of a significant amount of territory, makes you believe that there might be some kind of a possibility for ending the war, or do you think that this is basically going to encourage the Ukrainians to go and recapture the rest of its territory?
Well, I don't make comments about what each of the parties might think. I have the feeling that we are still far away from peace. I believe that peace is essential, peace in line with the UN Charter and international law, but I would be lying if I would say that I hope that it will happen soon.
Thank you. Michelle Nichols, Reuters.
Sorry, Secretary General, I'm not used to wearing a mask again. Michelle Nichols from Reuters. Thank you for the briefing. Next week, obviously, you're going to have world leaders here in New York, but President Putin will not be here. When was the last time you spoke to him? Do you plan to speak with him again before the General Assembly? And are your conversations with him focused on these sort of mini deals to do with the nuclear plant, the ammonia deal that was discussed or we spoke about yesterday with Rebecca Greenspan? What's your message to him when you speak to him about a broader end to the war?
Well, the last time I spoke with President Putin was this morning. That is the reason why I came late to the press conference. We had the opportunity to discuss the Black Sea Grain Initiative and its extension and expansion, possible expansion. There are, as you know, talks in relation to the possibility of Russian ammonia exports through the Black Sea, in line with the methodology that is run by the JCC, the Joint Coordination Committee. We have discussed the obstacles that still exist in relation to the exports of Russia food and fertilizers. And I have to say that we have now a dramatic situation in the world in fertilizers. We are risking to have a fertilizer market crunch. We have news from different parts of the world where the areas cultivated are much smaller than in the previous cycle, which means that we risk to have in 2022 real lack of food. So to remove the obstacles that still exist in relation to the export of Russian fertilizers is absolutely essential at the present moment. On the other hand, we discuss the questions of prisoners of war. We discuss the fact-finding mission. The fact-finding mission will be able to go to the area in which the attack that victimized so many prisoners of war took place. It will be able to go, there will be no obstacle from the Russian side for it to go through whatever way we choose, and that is a very important aspect. On the other hand, we discuss prisoners of war in general, we discuss Zaporizhia, and we discuss all the other aspects that are relevant in the present situation. And I usually do not say what I say in phone calls. My positions are known.
Thank you. Gregory, TASS News Agency.
Thank you very much. Secretary General, I just want to follow up on grain deal. Are you going to continue to discuss the possible extension of a grain deal with Russian side due to the fact that there is almost no export of Russian food and fertilizers yet. And so are you going to discuss that during the high-level week? Thank you.
Of course. I mean, first of all, there are some exports of Russian food and fertilizers, but much lower than what is desirable and what will be needed. And of course, this is an area that I've been referring, and I will refer clearly during the general debate.
Thank you. Natalia, ICTV, Ukraine.
General Secretary, I'm Natalie Lutenko
Sorry.
from here. I'm here. Hi, I'm Natalie Lutenko from ICTV station Ukraine. My question is about the prisoners of war that you have discussed. Actually, we know that it's known that Russia is prevents access to Ukrainian prisoners of war. So are you going to discuss that with the Russian delegation here? That is it possible to go to them for Ukrainian side? And is it possible to press your country with a veto in question of prisoners?
Sorry, I didn't understand.
Is it possible to press to Russia with a veto in question of prisoners? To press them?
I mean, these are areas related to what member states might decide in relation to resolutions that they present. What I can tell you is that I had the chance to discuss it today. I believe that there are negotiations still taking place, and I strongly hope that the problem of prisoners of war will be entirely solved, and I strongly hope that all prisoners of war from both sides will be exchanged.
Pam Falk, CBS News.
Thank you, Steph. Thank you, Secretary General. I'm hearing music. It's Pamela Falk from CBS News. You personally helped broker the Ukraine grain deal. You spoke with President Putin, you spoke with President Zelensky, you spoke with President Erdogan. And that is helping alleviate world hunger. Do you see this as any kind of a building block or a prototype for a peace deal? And if not, what are the impediments for you in your capacity to try to broker a deal for peace? Thank you.
Well, obviously anything that can help rebuild confidence is useful, but it would be naive to think that we are close to the possibility of a peace deal. My good offices are ready, but I have no illusions that at the present moment the chances of a peace deal are minimal at the present moment. So obviously I go on with my contacts with both sides and hope that one day it will be possible to move into a higher level of discussion. Now we are discussing the exports of ammonia. Now we are discussing aspects related to prisoners of war or to the fact-finding mission or to Zaporizhia. One day, I hope it will be possible to discuss peace.
Iftikhar Ali, Associated Press of Pakistan. Your microphone, please.
Thank you very much, Steph. Mr. Secretary General, at the very top of your opening statement, which was very passionate indeed, you referred to your solidarity visit to Pakistan, which you know was deeply appreciated, and especially by the victims. But, sir, since your visit, the situation has further deteriorated because of more rains in some of the affected areas. This has worsened an already bad situation. Sir, you know, you have listed some of the steps that will to fight the climate exchange, but Pakistan's needs are immediate, as you have already said, you see. So what steps, specific steps, you will take in order to translate your call for support to Pakistan into tangible action?
Well, first of all, we are strongly appealing to all that can help Pakistan to mobilize all their resources. There are some countries that have been provided support. The UN is fully mobilized to support Pakistan, but Pakistan needs a massive inflow of financial resources. And my appeal to international financial institutions and my appeal to countries that have financial capacity is not to lose one moment in providing Pakistan with the financial resources that are necessary for the gigantic tasks that are in front of us, for still avoiding the worst, and at the same time for relief, recovery and reconstruction at a scale that, as I said, is unimaginable. And I've never seen anything similar anywhere in the world.
Ibtisam Azam.
Thank you. My name is Ibtisam Azam from Al Arabi Al Jadid newspaper. I just, at the beginning, I want to follow up quickly on the issue of your phone call with President Putin today. Did you bring also up the issue of ceasefire or the issue of ceasefire and coming to the negotiation table? And my question is actually on Libya. Finally, the Security Council agreed to your appointments of Mr. Abdullah Batili as your special representative in Libya. So what is the biggest challenge you believe he's facing there? And as his boss, what are you going to do to support his mission so that it's not doomed to fail as the missions of his predecessors? Are you going to speak truth to powerful countries, especially when it comes to their weapon delivery, mercenaries, etc.? Thank you. And thanks.
As I said, I think the ceasefire is not in sight. In relation to Libya, it's difficult to know what is the biggest challenge that requires action. We must preserve at all cost peace. And that means preserve peace between East and West, but that also means preserve peace in relation to the recent confrontations that happened in Tripoli with the militias supporting either Mr. Mbeida or Mr. Bashada. So we need hostilities not to happen. That is fundamental. Second, we need to come to quickly an agreement, namely between the House of Representatives and the High Council to allow for the changes that are necessary, legal changes that are necessary for elections to take place. And this is absolutely essential because there is a question of legitimacy that now becomes extremely difficult to overcome. And then the third thing is to make sure that all external actors in the context are able to fully support a process of reconciliation and a process of political developments leading to elections and to a legitimate government that everybody accepts.
Thank you. Chris, CBC.
Thank you for this briefing, Secretary General. Chris Reyes with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. If I could just ask you a big picture question. Earlier this year, President Zelensky in his address to Congress said the war of the past have prompted our predecessors to create institutions that should protect us from war, but they unfortunately don't work. We see it, you see it, we need new ones. And I'm wondering, as we head into next week's high-level debates, as we're 7 months into this war in Ukraine, can you reflect on how effective you and the UN have been in upholding this institution's core principles, and what lessons you've learned to ensure that the influence and the effectiveness of the UN remains relevant and effective, not just in conflicts in Ukraine, but the crisis that you've mentioned, climate, food insecurity, and things like that? Thank you.
Well, that's exactly the question. People tend to see the Ukraine to see the UN looking at the Security Council. The UN goes far beyond the Security Council. And there was an important change in this session, or in the last session, in the relations between the Security Council and the General Assembly. Now each veto issued in the Security Council will require a meeting of the General Assembly where the veto needs to be explained and discussed. And I think this has changed in an important way the balance between the two bodies, and I believe the General Assembly has been gaining credibility in the international community, which of course does not fully compensate for the difficulties of the Security Council. But the UN is by far the largest purveyor of humanitarian aid in the world. UN agencies are everywhere where there is conflict, where there are natural disasters, independently of the dangers. The UN has peacekeeping forces avoiding the worst in several parts of the world. The UN has been very active in relation to climate change. I believe that probably the strongest voice in relation to climate change has been the voice of the UN. The UN has been very active, pushing for reforms of the international financial system and pushing for the need to effectively support developing countries in relation to the dramatic situation that they face at the present moment, the perfect storm that they face at the present moment. The UN has been very active in several conflict situations, mediating. Look at the pause that is taking place in Yemen. And in the Ukraine, the UN has been very active in trying to find concrete solutions to concrete problems in which mediation is possible, recognizing that to solve the problem in its entirety is not possible at the present moment. So if I believe there is a moment in which the UN is more needed than ever, and if I believe that there is, if I believe that there is a moment, that it is this moment, and I think it is this moment also, a moment in which you see the UN present everywhere. Of course, the UN cannot be limited to the fact that a group of member states in the Security Council are unable to come to an agreement in solving the worst crisis that we face, namely the crisis in the Ukraine.
Benno, German Press Agency.
Thank you, Secretary General, for the briefing. Benno Schwinghammer, the German Press Agency. I have one follow-up to the grain deal and one actual question about Libya. So it was 1 week ago, roughly, that Vladimir Putin threatened to let the grain deal collapse. Now you talked with him this morning. Did he threaten again to close down the Black Sea corridor?
No, I believe that there is a very important dialogue between the UN and the Russian Federation, between the UN and Ukraine, and we are looking not only at maintaining the grain deal, but expanding it, namely in relation to, just to give an example, the possibility of having ammonia exports through the same channel from the Russian Federation. And the possibility of an extension in time of the grain deal. All this has been discussed, and I am hopeful that we will be able to maintain a very important contribution to the dramatic situation of food security in the world. And as I mentioned, that if we are able, and we are totally committed to it, to remove the obstacles that still exist in relation to the Russian exports of fertilizers, that we will be able to normalize the fertilizer market and allow for the cultivation for next year to take place at the usual levels.
Now my question about Libya. While the UN's track record is quite good in terms of Ukraine, there are other conflicts which kind of, where progress kind of slipped out of your hands, for example, Libya. How important is it now to revive the Berlin process? If you talk with Chancellor Scholz, the German Chancellor Scholz, next week, will you talk with him about gathering people again and conduct a new conference?
Important, and the German Minister of Foreign Affairs already indicated that Germany would be thinking about that possibility, and I strongly encourage that. I do believe that the Berlin process was the most useful international instrument that we had to avoid the worst. Unfortunately, it was not possible to reach a full solution, but it was possible to avoid the worst.
Amélie, Agence France Presse.
From AFP News Agency. You talked several times about the Black Sea Grain Initiative, which helped ease the pressure on the food market. But with winter coming, there's an energy crisis also looming for this winter in the next few months in many countries in the world. So what could the UN, what could you do in this front? Thank you.
It is much more difficult to address the energy questions than to address the food security questions. In the energy questions, we have a combination of high interests, member states' interests, companies' interests, that make progress much more difficult because those interests are largely contradictory. And I have to say that I find it absolutely unacceptable to see that when people are suffering so much in different parts of the world, and namely because of the high costs of energy and the high costs of fuel, to see fossil fuel companies having the largest profits ever, or at least in the recent past, and I strongly encourage governments to tax those exceptional profits.
Margaret Bashir, Voice of America.
Thank you, Secretary General. Secretary General, next week, the foreign ministers of both Russia and Ukraine are going to be here. Are you trying to organize any kind of a meeting between them using your good offices, either a direct meeting or some sort of an indirect shuttle diplomacy between rooms or something, to try and work out some of these important issues that you mentioned, like the POWs in Zaporizhzhia?
If I announce today that I'm trying to bring them together, that is the best way to make sure that they will not meet.
Thank you. Ragida Dergam in the back.
Columnist with the National and An-Nahar al-Arabi. The IAEA seems to be at the very center of the problem for the JCPOA and the deal with Iran. You know that the Iranian position, which is calling the positions of the IAEA being politically driven, so they say, and it seems to be a deal breaker. What is it that you'd like to say to the Iranian leadership about their position regarding restricting the IAEA and demanding that its scope is limited, scope of work is limited in Tehran? What is it directly that you would like to say to the Iranian leadership on this matter and on how to get out of this impasse?
Well, I think the IAEA is a very important pillar. And I believe that its independence that exists and must be preserved is essential. The IAEA cannot be the instrument of parties against other parties. And I do believe the IAEA is doing its role based on the technical aspects in which the IAEA is supposed to have the knowledge and the capacity to deal. My appeal to the government of Iran or to any other government in the same situation is to establish a serious dialogue with the IAEA, creating the conditions for an effective cooperation that is needed for the credibility of any agreement. Sorry?
Do you feel now that this potential deal between Iran and the 5+1 is doomed because of that position on the IAEA, or do you think there is a way to facilitate coming out of this dilemma?
I do not think that is the most difficult question that is on the table. I think there are other difficult questions on the table, And my appeal to all parties is to make sure that they are all solved.
Kirsten Salome, Al Jazeera.
Thank you, Secretary General. Kristen Salumi from Al Jazeera. You had some strong words for G20 leaders in your opening remarks. Many of them will be at the funeral of Queen Elizabeth next week. I'm wondering if you could talk about your decision not to attend the funeral and how you think that might impact the global focus on this important event and all the important issues you're trying to highlight next week.
I did not decide not to attend the funeral. I decided to stay in New York to open the Education Summit that is convened by me and in which many people that do not go to the funeral will be present. So it is my duty as Secretary General of the United Nations to be here when we have a summit convened by me. Probably some of the personalities that were supposed to be in that summit will not be able to come, but others will be coming, and I'm convinced that the Education Summit will be successful. And the next day is the opening of the general debate, and obviously it would be inconceivable that the Secretary General would not be opening the opening of the general debate. So I did not take a decision not to go to the funeral. I took a decision to just exercise my duties as I believe all member states would consider necessary.
Thank you. Yes, sir, BBC.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
It's not working.
Yeah, hold on. There we go. Nope.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for doing this. Bahman Kalbasi, BBC News. You talked about JCPOA briefly. Do you mind expanding a little bit on that? Whether do you think you may have any sway with the Iranian leaders? Mr. Raisi will be attending for the first time. And also on human rights, this president was personally a member of committee in the 80s that ordered mass executions of political prisoners. The special rapporteur extensively talks about worsening situation of human rights in Iran against activists, political opponents. What is your message to Mr. Raisi if you see him both on JCPOA and on this dismal human rights record?
I do believe that that meeting will take place, and it is obvious that those two issues will be in the agenda.
Thank you. Yes, please, go ahead. Marta, go ahead, please. Lusa. So, yeah.
If I have permission to make the question in Portuguese. O Sr. Secretário-Geral fez um discurso forte contra os países ricos. Mas qual é a sua mensagem para os países africanos que constantemente sofrem com as alterações climáticas, agora também com a guerra na Ucrânia? Qual é a mensagem para estes países que, ano após ano, se sentam aqui na Assembleia Geral e veem os problemas constantemente a acontecer? E uma segunda pergunta é, o novo presidente da Assembleia Geral disse na segunda-feira que trabalhará ativamente para uma reforma do Conselho de Segurança e eu queria saber se o Sr. Secretário-Geral irá apoiar esse trabalho. Obrigada.
Em primeiro lugar, em relação ao Conselho de Segurança, há uma comissão de Estados-membros que se debruça sobre esse tema e, naturalmente, essa comissão terá todo o meu apoio, embora eu não tenha uma direta responsabilidade a esse nível. Eu não falei contra ninguém, eu falei a favor dos países em desenvolvimento, e nomeadamente dos países africanos. Os países africanos estão, muitos países em desenvolvimento, a maioria deles no mundo, está, como eu dizia há pouco, face a uma tempestade perfeita. Não sei como é que em português se traduz o perfect storm, mas eu estou a traduzir à letra. Muitos deles não tiveram vacinas a tempo. Os fundos que na Europa e nos Estados Unidos foi possível mobilizar imprimindo dinheiro. Esses países não podem imprimir dinheiro, senão as suas moedas imediatamente se desvalorizam de forma inaceitável. Não houve alívio da dívida. a não ser uma pequena suspensão em relação aos países menos desenvolvidos, mas alívio da dívida não existiu. Não houve acesso com financiamentos beneficiados, quer subsídios, quer com taxas de juro mais baixas, para países em desenvolvimento com rendimento médio, que enfrentam gravíssimos problemas. Vejam-se as pequenas ilhas que tinham no turismo a sua receita fundamental e não tiveram receitas durante 2 anos, e têm o impacto das alterações climáticas e têm o impacto dos altos preços de energia de que são inteiramente dependentes e da alimentação. Esses países sofreram agora as consequências da guerra na Ucrânia, e a verdade é que isso faz com que a situação seja uma situação muitas vezes desesperada, porque não há espaço fiscal para responder às necessidades dos respectivos povos, e vemos a pobreza e a fome aumentarem de uma forma dramática. E é por isso que nós temos permanentemente insistido na adoção de imediatas medidas para dar liquidez a essas economias e para aliviar a dívida desses países, e, ao mesmo tempo, temos insistido na necessidade de uma reforma do sistema financeiro global, porque o atual sistema financeiro foi um sistema definido pelos ricos a favor dos ricos e não serve de maneira nenhuma aos interesses dos países em desenvolvimento, nomeadamente dos países africanos.
Thank you. We will transcribe that into English for the transcript. Yes, please go ahead.
Secretary General, you mentioned the real risk of multiple famines this year. If the grain shipments are not sufficient, if the ammonia doesn't help fertilizers soon enough, what else can and should be done, and how can you convince world leaders to help with that?
Well, first of all, we need to mobilize all resources. In 2022, we have no lack of food. We have a problem of distribution. So what we have is to guarantee that there are effective mechanisms that allow developing countries with risk of famine to be able to have access to the food that is available. And this either through forms of direct assistance. The World Food Programme, as you know, is very active. We had 2 ships that left the Black Sea, one to Yemen and one to the Horn of Africa. A third is now being loaded to go to Djibouti, and the 4th will be arriving to go to Afghanistan. So we need to boost assistance, food assistance, to those more vulnerable situations, and we need to create the conditions for these countries to have resources to be able to have access to the food markets. On the other hand, if in 2022 we have not a problem of food, we have a problem of distribution, if we don't normalize the fertilizer market, we will have a problem of food in 2023. And indeed, we have news from West Africa and other parts of the world that farmers are cultivating less than in the previous year. And that is the reason why we absolutely need to normalize the fertilizer market. And that is the reason why I strongly appeal to remove all obstacles to the exports of Russian fertilizers that are not, I repeat, that are not subject to sanctions.
Thank you. Mr. Inaba, Kyoto.
From Kyoto News. Thank you, Secretary General. I have a follow-up question on Ukraine. It seems there is some possibility in the coming weeks or coming months that Ukraine will be in counter-offensive, and while Russia will be solely defensive. In that situation, would you still call for the immediate ceasefire? What is your vision? What is your feasible plan to end this war? Thank you.
Well, we cannot appeal to ceasefires based on who's winning the war. I mean, because if you appeal to ceasefires when one is winning and you don't appeal to ceasefire when the other is winning, then, I mean, things do not make any sense. What we have been saying since the beginning is that what we need is peace. And peace, and I always repeat, in line with the UN Charter and in line with international law. I do not believe the conditions now are met for that to be possible. And so we will go on working to progressively, hopefully, create the trust that will build the capacity for those conditions to exist. And in between, we try to mediate all aspects in which we can be useful and we can limit suffering and we can limit the consequences of the war in Ukraine in the world. And so many developing countries are suffering so much that we really need to pursue this objective very strongly. But I would not be telling the truth to you if I would create illusions that we are going to obtain a ceasefire tomorrow because there has been a change in the way the military operations are taking place.
Thank you. We're going to go online. Ephraim, Arab News.
Thank you so much, Stefan. Mr. Secretary General, how do you see the role of the GCC countries, especially Saudi Arabia and the UAE, in tackling the current global crises, from food insecurity to energy to climate, as well as the more regional crises of the Middle East, from Syria, Yemen, Libya, and Palestine? And in what ways do you see the role can be enhanced? Thank you very much.
Well, first of all, I hope the GCC countries that have a huge capacity of production will contribute to minimize the energy crisis in the world. And I'm sure that they will be quite active in relation to the promotion of peace solutions in the neighborhood. I mean, be it in Syria, be it in Libya, or in Yemen, or in any other country close to them. I think that the people of Syria, the people of Libya, and the people of Yemen have already suffered too much. And my appeal is for everybody to come together to solve those problems. On the other hand, I hope that the dialogue that started between Saudi Arabia and Iran and other forms of dialogue in the region will produce results and will allow to a reduction of the tension in the Gulf.
Thank you. We have to return the Secretary General to his phone call. So, sir, thank you very much, and we will see you all soon. Thank you.